Hi everyone, I am Sabrina Velazquez and my classmates are Herrera Lourdes, Quintana Juan, and Pallares María. Today we are going to present analysis of I Too and the Negro Speaks of Rivers by Langston Hughes and Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. I Too. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen. Then, besides, they see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I, too, am America. Let's begin by the author Langston Hughes. He was an American poet, social activist, novelist, playwright, and columnist from Joplin, Missouri. He was one of the earliest innovators of the 10 new literary art form called jazz poetry. Hughes is best known as a leader of the Harlem Renaissance in New York City. He famously wrote about the period that the Negro was in vogue, which was later paraphrased as when Harlem was in vogue. I'd like now to discuss the poem. I Too is a short free-verse poem of 18 short lines made up of 5 stanzas. There is no rhyme scheme and the meter varies from line to line. It was written by Langston Hughes, who was a writer and staunch advocate for African Americans in the 1920s. As such, this poem focuses on African American identity within the dominant white culture of the USA. Moreover, it involves a history of oppression of black people by means of slavery, denial of rights, and inequality. Now we'll move on to the background. In this poem, the speaker, who is probably Hughes himself, is proclaiming to the world that he too is an American. He too sings America. He refers to himself as the darker brother, and even though he is not allowed to be seen as an equal among men in his country, he is still an important and integral part of America. And despite the fact that the poem is dealing with a very painful subject, such as racism, the poet and speaker are still hopeful that one day soon the powers that be will be ashamed of the way they have treated African Americans, and they will see that they are also a part of the country. The next is the historical analysis. During the span of his lifetime, Hughes saw America grow and evolve when it came to equal rights for minorities. Even though slavery had been abolished years before he was born, Hughes still encountered blatant racism and oppression as a black man. His writings often represent this oppression, and through his poetry, he fights the majority and sings the praises of his fellow African Americans. Fortunately, Hughes lived long enough to see the Civil Rights Act of 1964 become law. However, the struggles of African Americans and other minority groups continue to exist in the United States today. Let's look now at the title. The speaker begins by announcing, I too sing America. Here we have an allusion to a poem by Walt Whitman, I Hear Americans Singing. In that poem, Whitman describes America as a song, which emerges from a diverse chorus of workers, farmers, and industrial laborers, women and men. And also we have a metaphorical meaning because America is like a song made up of many different voices singing. So here the author just adds another voice to this song of America, the voice of Black Americans. I'd like now to discuss the 4 devices that we found in the poem. The first one is metaphor. For instance, in the second line, I am the darker brother, this means that the speaker is a Black American citizen. The second device is metonymy. For example, the word company represents white society. It literally means guests or vistas. And another good example is kitchen, which stands for segregation. That is the unequal treatment faced by Black Americans. And the last word is table, which symbolizes respect, equality of opportunity, power, and participation. It means the opportunity to engage meaningfully in American democracy as an equal player. The third one is repetition. When the speaker repeats it in the kitchen and when company comes, the speaker is contrasting the current situation with the situation he hopes for in the future. This is clear in the separation of those two stanzas, and it is evident that repetition is employed to prove the opposite, that history must not be repeated itself and Americans must learn to change. And the last device is parallelism. The last line, I too am America, is a parallel with the opening one, I too sing America, and reinforces the idea of the speaker fully integrated. Now he's America, no longer excluded, no longer a problem but a solution, no longer a human divided but a whole person totally identified as American. Now we'll move on to the major themes of the poem. The first one is racism. I too is a cry of protest against American racism. Its speaker, a black man, regrets the way that he is excluded from American society. But the speaker argues black people are persistent and will persist through the injustice of racism and segregation by developing a vibrant, beautiful, and independent cultural tradition. A cultural tradition so powerful that it will eventually compel white society to recognize black contributions to American life and history. The second major theme is American identity. Throughout the poem, the speaker insists that he is authentically American and that his community has made important contributions to American life. And the last one is freedom. In I Too, freedom is the big L. By refusing to buckle under the awful pressures of slavery and oppression, the speaker moves ever closer towards eventual freedom and racial equality. He's looking forward to the day America fulfills her promise of freedom.
The Negro Speaks of Rivers. Ivan know rivers. Ivan know rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when those were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it led me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went out to New Orleans, and I have seen its muddy bosom turn no golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Now, let's move on to the author, Langston Hughes. As you may have noticed, this is the same author of I Too, and my classmate has already talked about him. Langston Hughes was an American poet, social activist, novelist, and playwright. He is also an important figure in the Harlem Renaissance, that is, a literary and cultural movement among Black Americans which flourished between the 1920s to the 1930s. He made the African American experience the subject of his writing. He wrote the poem The Negro Speaks of Rivers the summer after his graduation from high school in Cleveland. Now, let's analyze the poem's title, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. Well, with relation to it, we can say that the title's meaning is obvious because it leaves clear that the speaker is referring not only to a Negro, but he is also speaking of all Negroes, and that it addresses slavery and African American experience throughout history, leaving it clear that Black people are also part of human history. Now, if we pay attention to the word river, we may notice that here it has a hidden meaning, and maybe we can say that the speaker uses this word to represent Black people perseverance. Now let's analyze the poem. The poem opens with the following line: I've known rivers. In relation to this line, we can say that the poem opens with a speaker expressing his own experience. As you may notice, it doesn't seem something impressive when you read it for the first time, because we all know what a river is. But maybe he uses the word rivers to refer to something else. Maybe something related to his own experience as an African American. Now let's move on to the closing lines. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. We think that this line highlights that the speaker has internalized the deep history and experience that the rivers represent. Now let's talk about the speaker of the poem. In this case, the speaker of the poem is male and speaks in the first person. For example, when he says, I've known and my soul. The speaker speaks from the depth of his heart and leaves clear his heritage and memories of ancient rivers in Africa. Lastly, let's talk about the mood and tone of the poem. In relation to it, we can say that the mood of the poem is proudly and incentive, because it seems that the speaker feels proud about his body, race, cultural identity, as he doesn't regret belonging to that group of people. I mean African American. Now let's learn more about the poem's background. The poem first appeared in the magazine Greases in June of 1921 and was published in Hughes' first volume of poetry, The Weary Blues. This is a key poem of literary movement called Harlem Renaissance. This poem traces Black history from the beginning of human civilization to the present, reflecting both triumph, like the construction of pyramids, and American slavery. Now let's analyze the poem. The Negro Speaks of Rivers is a free-verse poem because it doesn't rhyme or have a regular rhythm. In relation to the stanza, the poem doesn't follow a specific form because the first stanza contains 3 lines, the second contains just 1, the third one is longer than the others, consisting of 6 lines. The fourth one contains only 2 lines, and the last one just 1. In the poem, we could also notice the repetitions of words like rivers and soul. The Negro Speaks of Rivers seem to be about the African Americans' experience in history and the historical periods of African American, like the Harlem Renaissance. In the poem, the speaker mentioned his own experience, for example, when he talks about his past activities near the Congo, the Nile, and the Euphrates, which also tell us more about his love for his race.
The devices that we can find in the poem are simile, imagery, personification. Simile is the comparison between 2 unlike things using the words like or as. For example, I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow blood in human beings. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Imagery is the author's use of vivid descriptions of actions, events, characters, etc. It evokes the senses. For example, ancient dusky rivers. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. Personification is a non-human thing is endowed with human characteristics. For example, I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans. In this line, the poet compares slavery with the ancient world, meaning that slavery has existed a long history and that it is part of human history. In this case, the speaker compares his soul with the depth of rivers, meaning that he has become stronger. In this line, the Mississippi River is given a human characteristic as the author suggests that the river can sing. Let's talk about the themes found in The Negro Speaks of Rivers. Cultural identity. We can say that this theme is shown in the poem because it deals with America's slavery during history. For example, it's evident when the speaker says, I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human beings. Then we have perseverance. It's shown in the way the speaker describes how black people learned to persevere when they were slaves. For example, when the speaker says, my soul has grown deep, he's saying that he has grown strong. Pride. It is shown in the way the speaker doesn't regret being black. Instead, he seems to be proud of his race, skin color, etc. Now we are going to analyze Still I Rise, published in 1978 by Maya Angelou. We will start reading the poem and hope you enjoy it. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides. Just like hopes springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes? Shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I got gold mines, digging in my own backyard.
You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like hair, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my ties? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise.
I am the hope and the dream of the slave. And so, naturally, there I go rising.
Now let's talk about the author Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou was an award-winning author, poet, civil rights activist, college professor, and screenwriter. Her literary works were an important part of the civil rights movement. She was also an inspiration to female writers and African American writers around the globe. Angelou was among the most influential women of her time. As a civil rights activist, Angelou worked for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. In 2000, Angelou was awarded the National Medal of Arts by President Bill Clinton. In 2010, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, that is the highest civilian honor in the US, by President Barack Obama. Although her writing is shaped by her experiences as an African American, the topics and issues Angelou deals with remain universal. Still Arise is an empowering poem about the struggle to overcome prejudice and injustice. It is one of Maya Angelou's most popular poems, first published in her similarly titled 1978 book of poetry, And Still Arise. This poem has inspired many rappers and famous icons of Black American culture. For example, Tupac Shakur's posthumous 1999 release, Still Arise, is clearly named in honor of the poem of Maya. Another well-known artists that were inspired by Maya were Nicki Minaj and Kanye West, which both reference her poem in a track, and the famous tennis player Serena Williams, who read the poem in a YouTube video.
Now I will talk about the lyric. It is a short non-narrative poem in which a single speaker presents a state of mind or emotional state. Rather than tell a story, the speaker talks about his thoughts using a specific rhyming style. So, if you read a poem, you will notice that there are several moments in which the author describes the feeling of these minority groups against the worst parts of the society. The major themes that we have found in this poem were overcoming oppression, belief in oneself, and love for one culture. Still Arise is primarily about self-respect and confidence. In the poem, Angelou reveals how she will overcome anything through her self-esteem. She shows how nothing can get her down. She will rise to any occasion and nothing, not even her skin color, will hold her back. Now I will talk about the devices. We have simile, that is a comparison between two unlike things by using the words like or as. Examples of simile: just like moons and like suns, but still like air, I rise. Another device that we have found is metaphor. What is the difference between simile and metaphor? The difference is in the words that they use. Simile uses the words like and as, but metaphor is more direct. Example of metaphor is I am the dream and the hope of the slave. Another one, I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. The closing lines are I rise, I rise, I rise. The closing lines are said like a mantra to let very clear that she won't give up no matter what, she will always rise again. The speaker of the poem, we could say that Maya is the speaker, but it could be anyone in the world, not just her or any Black American. It could be a universal speaker that narrates it in first person. Now I will talk about the mood and tone. It is motivating and in some way sarcastic. What I mean with it? All through the poem there is one marked tendency. There is the powerful message to not give up, to bear the tide. But there is something else to be mentioned, and that's the tone of the message. I just wrote this in a sarcastic way, like mocking the bad people with pride, making them know, throwing it to their faces, that she's still alive and will be happy. Now we talk about the title of the poem. The title's meaning is kind of obvious. It is about the constant fight for rights of Black American women. It uses the grammatical resource to emphasize the word still, making it the most important word followed by I and rise. Well, the poem Still I Rise is a great poem with a powerful message that is transmitted through rhymes and metaphor. It is clear in its words, referring to the oppression made by the racist side of society, making use of motivating rhymes, repetitions, and metaphors. Words that hold the pride of the people that this poem represents, the Black Americans. It could be seen as an anthem or a protest for equality of rights and respect. Moreover, it can be seen as an universal teaching not only for Black people, but also for everyone who is oppressed in any sort of. It conveys a strong message that teaches the reader to overcome oppression, with the pride of being oneself no matter the skin color, gender, beliefs, etc.
If I think of my life as a class and what I've really learned, I've learned a few things. First, I'm aware that I'm a child of God. It's such an amazing understanding to think that the it, which made fleas and mountains and rivers and stars, made me. What I prayed for is humility, to know that there's something greater than I. And I have to know that the brute, the bigot, and the batterer are all children of God, whether they know it or not. And I'm supposed to treat them accordingly. And it's hard, and I blow it all the time. I'd like everybody to think of a statement by Terence. The statement is, I am a human being. Nothing human can be alien to me. If you can internalize the least portion of that, you will never be able to say of an act, a criminal act, oh, I couldn't do that. No matter how heinous the crime, if a human being did it, you have to say, I have in me all the components that are in her or in him. I intend to use my energies constructively as opposed to destructively. If you can do that about the negative, just think what you can do about the positive. If a human being dreams a great dream, dares to love somebody, if a human being dares to be Martin King or Mahatma Gandhi or Mother Teresa or Malcolm X, if a human being dares to be bigger than the condition into which she or he was born, it means so can you. And so you can try to stretch yourself. So you can internalize, homo sum, humani nihila me alienum puto. I am a human being. Nothing human can be alien to me. That's one thing I'm learning.